Okay. So how we talked about stress last time, and it can be very debilitating. There are cognitive aspects to coping, there are behavioral aspects to coping, and there are emotional aspects to coping. And we need to know how in the world to put all these three together in order to manage stress. Coping is a dynamic process that often involves adjusting our cognitive, behavioral, and emotional reactions to a stressor. It is not a one-time reaction. You may react to stress, different stress in different ways. If you're having problems at home, you may have a different reaction than you would normally. Okay. So it really all depends. One of the things about modern society is if you show any vulnerability, a lot of times people around you will attack. It's like kicking somebody when they're down. We see this in today's society. That there may be people around that just want you to fail. Why would they want you to fail? What's wrong with people? Why shouldn't we try to build everybody up? Why should we want anybody to fail? See it on Facebook all the time.
I'm just thinking about from learning here that they're just trying to build you up to build your tolerance, I guess.
Well, that's it? They're trying to help you?
And they're in their tough love way. At least I just think of at least that's what I think of one of my professors.
Oh, that's nice. Well, let's pretend that that's true. Why would they want you to fail? Not your professors, of course. I'm thinking about your friends. Some of us have friends. I don't, but some other people have friends. No, I'm just kidding. Marius is my friend. Of course, he's only here 2 days a week. No, he's not. He's here 1.5 days a week, okay? So why would your friends want you to fail? Makes them feel better if you fail. They want the smartest person in the class not to do very well. They want you to flunk out of college. Why would they want that? Why would your high school friends want you to flunk out of college? Because they're competing with you. So competition, and you've got to recognize the fact that competition is out there. I didn't realize that we were in competition with each other. All the professors, all the psychology professors were competing with one another. I didn't realize that. I figured we were all just trying to help you guys get through things. But evidently we're competing. I don't have to worry about it because I'm old and I can just retire. I'm not going to retire out from under you guys, don't worry. The coping strategies vary in effectiveness. Some provide only temporary relief. Some are maladaptive in the long run, of course. And so if your way of coping with stress is to go out and get drunk, probably not the best way to do things. Might cause you problems. Might cause you trouble. Not a very good way of doing things. The best way to cope is to face your problems, to approach your problems, to be vigilant about what's going on, and to face it head on. You need to gather information, you need to take direct action, you need to make an active effort to resolve the problem. You need to be as proactive as you possibly can. Now sometimes, of course, you have to react to problems, and in that case, of course, you need to do as much as you possibly can to solve the problem. How about that? Great way to cope with things. Well, unfortunately, that's not the only way to cope with things. You can avoid your problem. That's what drinking does to you. I got a problem, I'm going to go out and get drunk. Now I've taken care of my problem. I don't care about my problem anymore. I'm drunk. I don't care about a whole lot of things. I think I can drive. And I drive okay. Maybe I go off the road a little bit, but that's okay. As long as there's not snow in the ditch, I can get out, probably, maybe. And of course, I think deer ran out in front of me, and that's why I steered into the, that's right, I steered into the ditch. Okay, I've got a reason. This is working perfectly. Avoidant coping is also known as minimizing coping. It's an attempt to avoid the problem in whatever way possible. You can do it with passive behavior. You can avoid people that give you a problem. You can not think about the problem, pretend it doesn't exist. You can use an antisocial technique. You can use drugs. You can use risky sexual behavior. We talk about this risky sexual behavior all the time in psychology class. It's in your textbook. I'm not making this shit up. I can, but I didn't this time. It's in your textbook. And the reason they talk about it is because they wrote this textbook not for you guys, not for people your age, but they wrote it for traditional students. Traditional students are students who graduate from high school and immediately go into college. So by the time they get into this class, which is probably their junior year, they're 21 years old. Or 20 or 21 years old. And when you're 20 or 21, no offense to Kiana, but when you're that young, you're pretty damn stupid. And people will use sex to dissipate, to hide from their problems. And they'll do really strange things just to stay away from whatever problem they have. My wife, when she was in college, she had a roommate that would go out on 3 dates a night. She would have a dinner date, she would have a supper date, and then she'd have a late supper date. And she would go out with these guys, and sometimes she'd have sex with them, but that, let's pretend she didn't have any sex. But she's eating meals with these guys. She's coming home, and guess what happens in the bathroom afterwards? Well, she throws all the food up. So the only food she kept in her stomach was from the late night. She pretended she was only dating one guy. She was dating 3 guys in the night. Evidently, she was very attractive. I've never really seen a picture of her. But she was so attractive that she became a newscaster on one of the stations in Atlanta. Anyway, very attractive young lady, and was using sex and dating to dissipate all of her other problems. She had another roommate that was Catholic, and this individual was having sex with her boyfriend. Eventually, and of course she couldn't use contraceptives because she's Catholic. She didn't want to break the whatever precepts of Catholicism. But she got pregnant a couple times and had abortions. And she would go in and confess her sins to her priest once a week. And she's having all this sex and she's doing all these things with her boyfriend. And then she's going to confession and confessing her sins. So why was she, why was she going to confession? It was to dissipate her stress from all the things that were happening to her. So risky sexual behavior is something that kids do, not us old farts. We don't do those kinds of things. We're reasonable as far as that's concerned. But that's the reason they talk about risky sexual behavior all the time. Taking the problems out on others, this is a good way to do it. It's never my fault, it's always Denise's fault. Thanks, Denise, troublemaker. She sits over there and causes trouble. She's the reason I tell so many stories. I can't get through a chapter. It's Denise's fault. Me blaming everything on Denise, of course, is a coping technique. It's an antisocial coping technique, but it's still a coping technique. We can fantasize, we can wish our problems away. I wish that didn't exist. I know. I'll pray to God and make that problem go away. Now I don't have to worry about it. It's God's problem now. We're wishing our problems away. Hoping for a miraculous intervention, of course, that is hoping that God will intervene and take care of things. Of the two styles approach, and I can tell you that I haven't always been I haven't always directly taken care of my problems. I was having problems with my first wife, and in the last class I told my class that I was hoping that she would get killed in an automobile accident. I was willing to give up my car so that I would get my kids So when I get rid of the crazy lady, you know, I was in a state of learned helplessness. I didn't know what to do. It was terrible because I wanted those kids, and I thought about this for like 6 months. And she goes to work, and of course she drives bad. She's not a very good girl. And I'm hoping she'll have an automobile accident, kill herself. Never happened. But she left me, and I'm going, oh my God. She finally did something. She took care of the problem. Because I couldn't take care of the problem myself. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid. I knew her personality, so I was afraid if I even suggested that I was going to leave her, that she'd take the kids and go back to mama. That's what I was afraid would happen.
During that 6 months, you coped it with fantasizing it?
Fantasizing about my wife being killed in an automobile accident. Hopefully none of you ever have to go through this where you're hoping your significant other dies. But, wow, I mean, it was that bad. It was the only way I could think of getting the kids, is if she died. Because I knew she'd take them. Even though she didn't take care of them, she didn't like them that much. She was breastfeeding my son. She left when he wasn't weaned yet when she left. That's how bad it was. It was bad. It was really bad. She didn't like me, okay? I was the most boring person in the world. And she ran off with this is weird. She ran off with a guy that's shorter than I am, okay? I'm only about 5'6", 5'7". This guy was like 5'3". You know, she's 5'1", he's 5'3". It's really kind of interesting. So, obviously it didn't have anything to do with height. The one thing, I can't remember the guy's name, but I remember he had a ganglion cyst on the back of his hand. What do you do with ganglion cysts? Well, you can either cut them out or you can smash them. So, one day, I took his hand and I went, well, we're going to get rid of that ganglion. It's just a bag of water is what it is. And I hit him on the palm of the hand and busted his ganglion cyst. Anyway. And he used to come over to the house all the time. Of course, now I know. Well, after I figured out what. The reason he was coming over was not to see me, it was to see my wife. Of the two styles, approach coping or vigilance is the most effective. Denise, you're causing me to tell more stories. Damn it. Vigilance is linked to better health outcomes. Vigilance is linked to less psychological distress. Vigilance is linked to a weaker physiological response to a stressor. So if you can face your problems, you're always going to be better off. In my case, I couldn't think of any way of facing my problems without losing my children. And that was the basic problem. So I had two problems at the same time. I had a crazy wife, and I needed to keep my children. And eventually, of course, she left. She left with the little short guy. Problem-focused coping deals directly with the stressful situation, reducing its demands, increasing our ability to deal with the stressor. The individual might break the problem into smaller or more manageable parts. In this case, I couldn't think of any solution to that problem. And I stewed over this for about 6 months. Emotion-focused coping is a coping strategy in which a person tries to control his or her emotional response to a stressor. We do this when there is little that we can do to reduce the stressor. So we just try to reduce the emotional problem. Sometimes people come into my office, complaints. Sue comes into my office. Sue goes off the deep end from time to time and just starts screaming, not at me, but at the system. And of course, I'm just sitting there, and it really irritates her that I don't react as strongly to things as she does. But I'm a guy for one thing. I'm not a very emotional person. And also, I try to control my emotions. I'm not going to get angry at something that I have no control over. It just doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to be beating my head against a brick wall, and that just doesn't make any sense to me. She's lived a different life than I have, so she gets angry at things. Problem-focused coping tends to appear in childhood. Emotion-focused coping appears in adolescence. So as children, we're better problem solvers than adolescents. One of the reasons that adolescents have such an emotional reaction to problems is because They are processing all their information through their amygdala, not their prefrontal cortex. This will change as they get older, and this is when you know you're an adult. When you stop being emotional about problems. You stop going off the deep end for one reason or another. Now, the other reason you go off the deep end is because you can control situations with your emotions. So if you become overly emotional, sometimes you can control your environment by being angry. That's borderline personality disorder, kind of, but we won't go into that part right now. But trying to control everybody with your emotions, everybody is walking on eggshells around you so they don't get you mad. What you're doing is you're controlling the situation with your emotions. You're acting like an adolescent is what you're actually doing. Drinking to take care of your problem is an adolescent solution to a problem. That's the way you solved a problem when you were a kid. Okay? Tell people that. Because they think that if they drink and get drunk, then all their problems go away. And all they're actually doing is creating a new problem. It's an adolescent way of handling a problem. The problem with drinking is that when you start drinking, especially when you start drinking in large and copious amounts, your brain stops maturing. So if you're a college student, an 18-year-old college student, and you start downing your beers, and you do this every weekend, all of a sudden your brain's never going to mature until you stop drinking. Then your brain can grow up again. It can start growing again. It can become more mature. If you've ever seen the movie Hangover, all those guys are successful men in their 30s. So what do they do for the bachelor party? They go to Las Vegas and get so drunk. Well, actually, they're on. He gives them roofies. He gives them roofies. But they go to Las Vegas to have a good time and to get drunk. Well, who does that? Well, adolescents do that. So they have continued to drink from adolescence until today, until they're in their 30s, and that's what that movie is actually all about, is stupid people never growing up. As a psychologist, that's what I see that movie. It's also funny. The Chinese guy jumping out of the car naked and beating everybody up. That's funny. I think that guy's the funniest guy. He's a real doctor. He's a medical doctor. The type of emotion-focused coping that is linked to the most emotional distress and health problems is rumination. Rumination is thinking repetitively about an upsetting situation. This can cause an emotional cascade where rumination leads to being upset, which leads to more rumination, yada, 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 yada. In other words, forget it. And how do you do that? Rumination, we just can't not think about it. And the more we think about it, the worse it gets. Because we keep coming up with negative scenarios. And now it's going to be worse. And we're spending all this time thinking. I'm having this problem with loneliness. I'm really lonely because my wife isn't here. And I can't wait for spring break. So I'm counting down the hours, the minutes, okay? On Thursday, on the 14th, as soon as I get out of here, as soon as I finish my lecture, I'm going to throw all this stuff in my office, and I'm going to jump in the car, and I'm going to take off for Oklahoma, which is the first leg of my trip, and then I'm going to turn north and go to Iowa. But I know exactly what's going to happen on the 14th and if it doesn't, I'm going to be one really pissed off puppy. Let me tell you. But I'm ruminating about this stuff. Last night I was sitting there in front of my stove, and I was thinking about my wife, and I wanted to call her. I can't talk to her all the time on the telephone. She's not very good on the telephone anyway. She's about as affectionate as a rock, you know. And I try to flirt with her a little bit on the telephone, and it goes right over her head. Jiminy Christmas. But I sat there thinking about this, And the next thing I know, it's like 30 minutes later. And all I was doing, my brain was just spinning about missing how much I missed my wife. Which is a good thing. You need to miss your wife. And when I go home, she'll make me sweep the floor, so I'll get pissed. I won't be nearly as much in love as I think I am. Problem-focused versus emotion-focused coping, which is better? It depends on the nature of the stressful event and whether constructive action is possible. Sometimes you have a problem that you can't solve. I have no money and I need a new car. Well, there's nothing you can do about that except make more money or borrow money. Probably there's no solution to that problem. So are you going to get angry about it? Well, that doesn't make any sense. There's nothing you can do about that. There's nothing I can do about missing my wife right now. What am I going to do? I can't see her until the 14th of February. And we got all this shit that's going to take place before I get to see my wife. We've got that Friday inter-campus day. Tomorrow I have to go to a meeting for inter-campus day. All this crap is going to take place before that. I've got a friend that's leaving on the 15th, so the last time I see him will be the 14th. That's tough. But I want to see my wife, so do I want to slow things down so that I'm around my friend more? Or do I want to accelerate things? But that will mean that he's gone quick. I know, quick. It's so bad. I don't know. Often the two...
It's like a Band-Aid. You want to rip it off or you want to go off really slowly?
It's going to hurt either way. And I got one on my heel that I don't know what I'm going to do with. I don't know how I'm going to deal with it. Often the two work together as emotion-focused coping is used in controlling initial emotional impulse and problem-focused is used later, dealing more constructively with the stressor. So problem-focused is something that you can use the two in conjunction with one another. Physiological differences: men have a stronger catecholamine reactivity to stressors, increased epinephrine and norepinephrine response. Why? Why in the world would men have a stronger epinephrine and norepinephrine response? Travis and I were just talking about this. Why would men need that? Why are we so different from women? You were telling me a story, Mose, you were telling me a story about coming in contact with some individuals that you weren't exactly sure if they were good people or bad people. And the guys wanted to do one thing and you talked them out of it. You were confronting... Yeah. You talked them out of it. And it turned out that you were right. But they wanted to just open fire and mow everybody down. Yeah. But most talked them out of it. And you saved all those civilians' lives, in essence, because they were ready to... Yeah, okay.
That's when the little kid came running out?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then the guys came down.
No, the guy, the security that was in front of me pointed their 50 cal at the little boy.
Yeah.
And they were ready to shoot. And then we had to get on the radio and tell him to not do it. Because,
I'm sure you used those words.
yeah.
Don't do
Don't
it.
do it, please. It's only the medical.
You stupid bastard.
But what had happened was when we were on convoy, we were driving through a village, and when it was during the Ramadan, that's one of the festivals in Iraq. We were driving through the village, and I seen this little kid running along. He was with a group of Arab guys, and they were telling him, pointing at our convoy. And I noticed it, and the little boy came running. And I was like, oh crap, I wonder what this little boy's got. I thought he might have been strapped with a bomb or something,
sure.
And he had something in his hand and he was running. So I got on the radio and I let them know that there was a young boy approaching our convoy running at a high rate of speed and that take precautions, So that's when the guy pointed his 50 cal on top of his rig,
Right.
pointed at that little boy. And then it just so happened that right when we were passing the vehicle, or passing that little boy, we met that little boy, and the little boy threw, and it was a banana peel. He threw a banana peel at us. And that's when I got on the radio and told him, don't shoot, it's only a banana peel.
We're under attack, we're under
Yeah.
attack.
So they were ready to, they were ready to open fire, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there was another situation where it was at night. And a bunch of guys came over the hills and you didn't know how to react.
That was another convoy when the guy slammed on his brake.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then our load, like. it
Right,
just-
shifted.
Yeah, it shifted.
And then all of a sudden, all these Arabs came from
The Arabs
nowhere.
came out of nowhere, yeah. I don't know. It was in the middle of nowhere, there was nothing around, and all of a sudden these people just came.
But how did the men react to that?
The civilians,
No, I'm talking about your,
our guys, they didn't know what to do. They were kind of afraid of whether to start firing or not.
Right.
Because they were coming at us really close and they were really, really, really close.
and what did you do?
That's when my combo commander took off. They grabbed the knife.
Oh, right, and
Yeah.
pointed
and
it at somebody.
pointed it at the civilians. Civilians
Right.
crawled away from us. They were begging us not to shoot.
Okay, so we've got a different reaction. We have two different reactions to the same situation. Males want to just open fire. I don't know if you guys don't understand what 50 cal would do to somebody, but it's a very large caliber. It's what you use to shoot down airplanes, okay? So if you hit a person with it, it makes a really big hole. Jeez, what a mess.
Yeah.
Okay, sniper rifles are there is a sniper rifle that's a 50 caliber, it just blows everything up. Anyway, okay, so men have a stronger catecholamine reactivity to stressors, increased epinephrine and norepinephrine response. This may reflect the tendency of men to be more hostile and seeking a physical solution when women in crisis than women in crisis situations. So women are less likely to be hostile. They're less likely to seek a hostile solution to a situation, just like Mose was explaining. That guy with the 50 caliber machine gun, he wanted to open fire on the little kid. And of course, if Mose had been male, no offense, but if she had been a male, she might have just said, go ahead and open fire. And they would have just mowed everybody down. They would have just shot everybody. They would have opened fire because hostility is one of their coping techniques. It's one of the reasons why men get in fistfights so much more frequently than women do. Because women solve their problems in different ways than men do. Women have a stronger glucocorticoid response, slowing down the immune response, so women are more likely to get sick. Men don't get sick, and the reason we don't get sick as frequently is because we have testosterone and we react with our testosterone. We'll go punch the wall. A woman will get sick because she internalizes everything. We try to project everything out. When under the same work-related stress, of course, there is no difference between male and female responses because they are in the same situation, reacting in similar manners. Because of the way that men are not socialized to show emotions, emotional approach coping may not be a viable option for them. Men may have a difficult time connecting emotionally with others. This may create loneliness and detachment because of their lack of emotion. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm suffering a lot more from my separation from my wife than my wife seems to be. Because she reacts differently than I do. And I can't show emotion. I don't show emotion. I haven't cried for such a long time. But my wife cries all the time. She watches a movie and she cries. She was watching something about dragons. How to Train Your Dragon. There's a new movie out. And she cried at the end of the movie. And of course my grandson is laughing at the end of the movie. And my daughter, I raised as a guy, because I am, and I didn't know how to teach her emotions. How do you do that? If you're a single parent, how do you teach a female emotions? If you're not a female, to teach her emotions. I mean, I couldn't allow my female side to come out. Exactly. I could have. I tried. I just couldn't, it wouldn't come out. Anyway, so she's kind of angry, but she gets angry. Whereas, you know, a woman wouldn't get angry, but she reacts with more hostility. She's hit a lot more people than punched a lot more people than I have. She's only 4'11", so, I mean, she has to swing up all the time. She doesn't let anybody she doesn't take anything off of anybody. Men emphasize problem-focused coping. Men emphasize, I have no idea why the question mark is there. Women emphasize emotion-focused coping. Socialization hypothesis. Girls and boys are socialized in different ways, creating lifelong behavioral differences. Potentially, if you're a little girl, your mother told you you're supposed to react in a certain way. You're supposed to wear these kinds of clothes. Don't be smarter than a man because it'll piss him off. You know, that kind of stupid stuff. And males, if our dad saw us crying, they said, "Men don't cry." You know, they would say that kind of stuff to us. And if you were in a situation with a bunch of other guys and you started crying, everybody made fun of you. So we were socialized not to do that, not to be emotional at all. Role consistent hypothesis, when stressors are the same, gender, of course, is irrelevant. This is more common in urban areas than it is in rural areas. Rural areas tend to have more gender bifurcation. Coping is easier if you've got money, if you've got time, if you've got a good job. This is a great job. I have no problem.
That was you.
Yeah, it is me, except for the champagne. I don't think my hands are that big. Yeah. See, my middle finger and my ring finger are just about the same length. That means something. I don't have no idea what it means. My second toe is taller than my big toe. That means something too. But look at this guy's fingers. See, his hands aren't the same as mine. That couldn't possibly be me. The more educated you are, the better it is to cope. Sometimes you can intellectualize a problem and pretend that it doesn't exist, or pretend that you have the solution to everything. Just ask somebody with a PhD, they think they have the answer to everything. They think they know everything. It's not true, they don't know everything. The more friends you have, the better coping that you may be able to do. If you have a stable family life, then you're probably able to cope. I was lucky, my mom and dad really liked each other. My mom was a nurse and my dad was a banker. They were both problem solvers. So we really didn't have to worry about a whole lot of stuff. If there was a problem, one or the other knew the solution to the problem. So, and they were this way all their lives. My mom died at 98, my dad died at 90. And they were able to solve just about any problem that we had. So we had not just a stable life as we were growing up, but it was fairly stable when we were adults. We were able to take care of things. They were able to take care of things. And if we had a problem, we could just call them up on the telephone and talk to them. My mother liked to talk to me because she didn't like me. So she'd tell me anything. They both hated my name. I explained to you what happened. They decided that they were going to name me Bruce. And my mom thought my dad liked the name, and my dad thought my mom liked the name. And it turned out that neither one of them liked the name. So they named me something they didn't like, which is me. So while I'm growing up, neither of them are referring to me by my name. My mom called me little shit. My dad called me skunk. which sounds like I must have smelled bad or something. But neither of them called me by my name, by their name. And when I asked my mom, she said, well, it's your dad's favorite name. And when I asked my dad, he said, well, it's your mom's favorite name. So I'm growing up thinking that it's both of their favorite names. It turned out both of them hated the name. And they told me this when I'm like 50 years old. Oh, God. Don't cry, Travis. It's not that sad. It's not a sad, sad story. It's not that sad a story. And I didn't know, and ignorance is bliss, so I was fairly blissful about the whole situation. Impoverished families experience more pollution, more substandard housing, more crime, more low-paying work, more limited education, lack of access to health insurance and health care. This may change. Looks like the Democrats are going to run on a platform of one-payer health care. One payer, if you have military insurance, IHS is one-payer health care. So as long as you can go to the hospital, you can get care. Now, I can't get care anywhere. I have to go to Gallup to get care. If I get sick, if I have a heart attack, I'm dead. I'm croaked. In the old days, last year, the IHS would take care of us, but they lost their contract. So us non-natives here, if we get sick, we're dead. We can't go to Chin Lee. I mean, there's nothing. There's no civilian down there to take care of us. So we have to go all the way to Gallup to get health care. As sad as that is, don't cry. Or Farmington. I guess we could go over the mountain to get health care. Anyway, the Democrats are thinking of a one-payer plan. And the one-payer plan will be a Medicare for all is primarily what it will be. You'll pay higher, they'll take more money out of your wages, but everybody will get health care. That's what the Democrats are talking about. So potentially, of course, if you're poor enough, then you get, you're on Medicaid, which is not a bad deal. If you're military, you get TRICARE. Do you have TRICARE? You weren't in long enough?
No.
Or you weren't? You weren't injured while you were... You can go to the VA. Children from low socioeconomic status homes experience more divorce, punitive parenting, and frequent school transfers. The case with the guy that prostituted his daughter, turns out that it was mom that did it. It wasn't dad. Dad didn't abuse her. Well, his abuse was selling her for drugs. But evidently it was the mom that was the hitter. And both of them are on trial. We saw the mother last night. So both of them are on trial for not taking care of this child. Low socioeconomic status, substandard housing, limited access to health care, greater incidence of health compromising behaviors, less problem-focused coping, possibly due to a sense of hopelessness. Their only recourse is to manage emotional responses. And of course, that's the only control that they have. So they can get angry. They can cry a lot. Doesn't do them any good, but at least it's the only thing that they can control. Stein and Nyamathi. Low socioeconomic status takes greater toll on women than on men. More frequent avoidant coping strategies. They become more passive. They fantasize more, and they may act in an antisocial manner. Women's coping techniques. The people in poverty situations, a lot of times it's the women taking care of the family. The man's either in jail or he leaves because he can't cope with not being able to take care of his family. And we see this a lot. We saw this during the Depression. If you've ever read, what is that book? Grapes of Wrath. At the end of the book, This happened a lot. Men just left their families. They couldn't do anything, they couldn't find a job, so they just left, and the mother had to take care of the family. And the father became a hobo, started riding the rails, started riding on all the trains. Of course, there were a lot more trains back then than there are today. But these men would just leave. So in a negative situation like that, a lot of times the guy just takes off, unfortunately. And the woman has to take care of everything. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Bruce.
Poverty level for some minorities is quite high. In 2008, the study of poverty levels found that children living below the poverty level, African Americans, 34.7% of all the children who are African American live below the poverty level. That represents 4.5% of the population. 34.7%. Hispanics, it's only 30.6%, but that represents 4.3% of the population. With whites, it's only 10.6%, but that represents 7.4% of the population. In other words, there are almost as many poor white people as there are African American white people in poverty and Hispanic people in poverty put together. Now the weird part is that when they start talking about welfare, they paint the picture as all of the people getting on welfare are black or they're Hispanic. They never paint the picture that we have all these poor white people wandering around the United States. But the reality is that almost half of the poor people in the United States are white. Now, who started painting this picture? It was President Reagan. He wanted welfare reform. He thought we were giving too much money away. So when he started, and he wanted to cut welfare for poor people. So when he did it, he didn't paint a realistic picture. He painted an unrealistic picture. He pretended that they were all somebody else, and he made them the enemy. He made black people the enemy. He painted poor people as people just trying to suck money away from all the wealthy people. That's the picture that he painted. And when George H.W. Bush became president, he did exactly the same thing. He tried to paint a picture as if all criminals were black. So we needed to control these guys. We needed to put them in prison and keep them there. 3 strikes and you're out. That's what he wanted. And of course, they're painting negative pictures about minorities. But the reality is there's a lot more poor white people in the United States than there are poor black people in the United States. He talked about welfare queens, these individuals that were having as many babies as they could so they would get more welfare money. And then they were buying Cadillacs. They were driving around in Cadillacs because they got so much welfare money. So they've changed all of this. Now if you're on food stamps, they give you a card. And you have to use that card to buy your food. But the reality is there are more people that look like this who are poor than people that look like this that are poor. But of course, that's not the picture we get. Middle-class African-American males report higher levels of racial discrimination than African-American women. Why in the world would males be more discriminated against than women? What's wrong with men? They're more threatening, exactly. The question of rape comes up. And this whole question of rape has been around since slavery days. They wrote stories and they painted pictures of African American males as if they couldn't control themselves. They were these sexual giants. They couldn't control themselves. So this picture has been prevalent in the United States for centuries, unfortunately, and it still exists today. There's a reason why white cops shoot black men. They don't shoot black women, they shoot black men. Why are they so afraid of a black man, whether he's got a gun or not? They seem to not be able to identify whether he's armed or not. And they assume that he is. Why is that? Well, this prejudice is real, and this prejudice has been out there for an extended length of time, unfortunately. And so this is, for this reason, I mean, does this guy look that dangerous? Are you afraid of him because his skin is black? He's got a white shirt and a red and white striped tie on. Does he look dangerous? Nah. If he came up to you on the street, would you be afraid of him? So what's the positive thing about black females? Why are they not dangerous? They live in the same house as, the black males, these sexual monsters. So why aren't they dangerous? Because women aren't dangerous. That is our assumption. In domestic violence cases, who's usually the perpetrator? Is it the male or the female? Men are hostile and women are sugar and spice and everything nice. Men are snips and snails and puppy dog tails. So who's usually the aggressor in a domestic violence situation? No.
It's usually, but the male always gets one.
The male always gets the blame because men are tend to be bigger than women are. Okay, well, so African American women are not dangerous, but African American males are seen as dangerous, even though they're just as nice as everybody else. The more years of education an African American male has, the stronger his perception of racial discrimination. He recognizes it because he has more education. He looks at things from different perspectives, and he sees more discrimination. African American males are more likely to experience microaggressions, insults, indignities, and marginalizing messages. What was I watching last night? I was watching a television show. Oh, Blackish. I was watching Blackish. I don't know how I got to that television show, but I started watching it, and it was all about Black History Month and the fact that they only studied 4 people: Martin Luther King Jr., Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, and I can't remember the 4th. The white guy wanted to study Sinbad because he thought he was the funniest comedian out there. Anyway, it was kind of a funny show. But and the white people were saying some really damn stupid stuff in that show. But of course, it was all for comedic effect. But the reality is, white people are pretty damn stupid about this kind of stuff. If you don't study history, you don't understand this stuff. You don't understand why black males are being shot in the streets, even to this day, even yesterday. You don't understand why it was such a shock when that black guy opened fire in Aurora, Illinois. That's an oddity. That doesn't happen. It's usually a white guy. But this was a black guy. This was a really strange situation. So if we have an African American individual and he's living in a different environment, he's living in a hostile environment. If he's living in a white environment, he has more stress. He has much more stress. So potentially I should feel a lot more stressed because I'm living in this environment. I am not Navajo. I know, shocks Denise every time I say that. I'm not an Indian. So this is a hostile environment to me, or it should be, or maybe, but I've lived all over the place, and every place I go, nobody likes me, everybody hates me. Except Joe's my friend, I got him back, and thanks for coming to class. I was feeling lonely here. College-educated African Americans are more likely than white cohorts to experience unemployment and job insecurity. Even economic success doesn't ensure more secure housing or community living conditions, as moving to the suburbs predicts higher mortality rates for African American males. despite the fact that they're living in a better environment, they still die younger. I graduated with, I went to college with 15 African Americans. I've already told you the story. I lived in the dorm with those guys, nicest people in the whole wide world. They were my friends. They were my buddies. They took me places. But at one point, several of them became quite hostile, not just to me, but to all white people. They didn't like white people. They started their own club, and they didn't invite me. I was insulted. I was embarrassed. I wanted to join that group. I couldn't. They wouldn't let me in. I didn't qualify. My face is too pale. Don't cry. It's all right. I survived, kind of, almost, just about. They're all dead. 15 guys. About 50 people have died from my graduating college class. And there are only 2 African Americans that are still alive, out of 15. The rest of them are dead. Why did they die? Some of them were gay, and some of them died of AIDS. 3 of them were gay, and they died of AIDS. But the rest of them just died from stress. I was on a record-setting 400-meter relay team. One of the guys on the team was black. He died at 45 of high blood pressure, heart attack. Yeah, heart attack. He died at 45. The other 3 guys on the team were white. I was one of them. We're all 3 still alive, but he died at 45. This guy that I ran track with. I know. This is kind of a telling situation. These were all college educated. They all went to jobs in white communities. They worked in a white corporation, and they all died of stress. So we're lucky we still have President Obama still alive. He's black, and he's in his 50s, I think. I think he's, yeah, maybe he's in his 60s. No, I think he's in his 50s. What's the difference between President Obama and this guy right here? And this African American? The other question is President Obama African American? His mother was white. His father was African. His father wasn't African American, he was African. His mother was white. So the question is he African American? He actually didn't grow up in the United States. Well, part of his early life was spent in Indonesia, where of course he was seen differently by that group of individuals. And then he moved to Hawaii. Has anybody ever been to Hawaii? Oh, Travis has been to Hawaii. Okay. A lot of white people there? No. Yeah, they're mostly Asian, Hawaiian,
So Obama wouldn't see that type of...
he didn't see that type of discrimination when he was growing up. Because Hawaii is a very diverse island. Lots and lots of different people. Not that many white people. And the white people that are there are mostly tourists. So they're seen as haoles. They're seen as offshore people. Okay. You were probably seen as a haole. Congratulations. Yeah, there you go.
No, I was seen as a local.
No, you weren't.
Yes.
You were seen as a local.
Welcome to
You speak Hawaiian. That's amazing. They use a lot of Hawaiian phrases, which is kind of interesting. In the 1990s, Sherman James proposed an African-American male coping mechanism called John Henry ISM. If you remember the story of John Henry, when John Henry was a little baby sitting on his daddy's knee, he said he wanted to be he wanted to drive spikes. That's what he said. And so he became the best spike driving railroad man in the world. I know. Gandy Dancer. Gandy Dancer was the guy that held the spike for the other guy to hit it. And if you've ever seen one of these sledgehammers that they use to drive the spikes, they've got a little tiny head on them. I mean, it's just, they're really slender. They're heavy, but they have this, and they have to hit that thing with that little tiny, jeez. And of course, if I tried it, I'd miss I'd miss half the time I'd be missing. Half the time when I'm trying to hit a nail, I'd miss it. But here, so John Henry he was a rail driving man, and so he was fast, and he was better than anybody else. He could drive a spike with one blow. That's the kind of guy he was. And then they invented a machine that could do it, and he raced that machine. That's the song. And he lost, and it broke his heart, and he died. And that's John Henry ISM. So the idea was that here is this iconic individual, this African-American hero, Black Panther-esque individual, and he goes up against technology and he loses. In the white community, he was an iconic figure until they invented something that overshadowed him, and then he died of a broken heart because he wasn't the best anymore. That was the story. So when they talk about John Henryism, they're talking about an individual that is seen as an iconic figure potentially, but they get their heart broken and they die young. They die relatively young. That was the idea. This coping technique involves facing stress with gargantuan efforts. So if you're black, and you can talk to any black executive that you want, and they will tell you that they have to work harder. I would imagine that if you talk to any natives that work in corporate white America, they will tell you they have to work harder because people see them as different. So in order for them to be accepted, they have to put forth more effort than a white person would. This gargantuan effort leads to hypertension and death at an early age. So these individuals that were pulling off the streets to go to college so that they could become corporate leaders, these individuals are actually dying young. If they're African American, if they're Hispanic, if they are Native, they are dying young. And this is because of this concept of John Henryism. Like I said, okay, I'm doing it. Recent studies have found that John Henryism is most likely when African American males are embedded in a low socioeconomic status with few means to escape. However, when afforded financial and educational equity, John Henryism is less likely. When I was working up north, the first thing they told me when I got to the reservation at Fort Belknap is that we work really hard here. We may be Indians, but we work really hard. That's what they told me. And of course, I didn't know what to think. It's very impressive. They work very hard. Yes. My mother would be happy because my mother, if I came in from the field and I wasn't sweating, my mother said that I didn't work hard enough. So I'd have to go back out, bale more hay or something. So I sweat a lot, as much as I possibly can. It impresses my mother. It impressed my mother, so that was my idea. But they told me that they're really hard workers. The reason they told me that is because the people in Montana, the white people in Montana, are fairly racist, and they think American Indians are all on welfare and that they're lazy, which wasn't true at all. And so the first thing they told me was that was incorrect. Of course, I'm not from Montana, so I didn't have the same ideas that other people have. And I've served with just about everybody. Anybody you can think of, and some people are lazy and some people aren't lazy, and it doesn't have anything to do with race, it has to do with mindsets. Some of the laziest people I ever ran into were city people. Lazy bastards. People from Chicago, you can't get them to do squat. I remember we were unloading a railroad, a train car, one time, and the boxes were like 50, 60 pounds. So they said, empty that car. So we go over there and, you know, there's like 15 of us, so it shouldn't have taken that long. But the city guys, they just sat down and they were trying to figure out how to do this in the most efficient way. And here the rest of us, the farm boys, are in there, we're just picking up these 60-pound boxes and we're taking them and we're putting them down. And of course, you know, we're just rural kids, we're just farm boys, we have to get the job done. That's our mindset. Their mindset is, don't do as much work as you can get away with. So we were like halfway through before they even stood up. I mean, that is how bad it was. And eventually, they were carrying one box between the two of them, you know. And here, we'd already unloaded half the damn train, carrying a box by ourselves. And they were carrying a box between the two of them. He's saying, this is a more efficient way of doing it. No, it wasn't. It took two of them to move one box, and we were moving one box with ourselves. Anyway, sons of bitches. Anyway, city people. I don't even remember what race they were. That's back when I didn't even see that kind of stuff. Hardiness is a cluster of stress buffering traits consisting of a commitment, challenges, and control. Hardy people view life demands as challenges rather than threats. Other tasks that other people might consider stressors are life commitments for hardy people that give their lives meaning. Family, whatever happens in your family, it's just the way things work. Your job, you know, I've never worked in my life. I've never worked. I've always enjoyed everything that I've done, so it doesn't feel like work. Community, now I have a problem with community, because if I have to leave my house, I'd rather just sit at home and not be harangued by people. Hardy people feel a stronger control, a level of control over their lives. Hardy personalities are linked to lower levels of anxiety and adaptive coping styles. Hardy individuals adjust to cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and many other health problems readily. These individuals look at life as a challenge, and they face that challenge, and they tackle that whatever that problem is. They don't work, they enjoy what they're doing. And for that reason, these people live a little bit longer than other individuals. If you confront something in a hostile manner, if you see something as a threat, then you're more likely to have a negative reaction to it. So as long as you face problems as a challenge rather than a threat, then you're less likely to have a negative outcome. Hardiness and health are more pronounced in men than in women. Research shows that hardy people have different mindsets than their sickly cohorts. They have stronger commitments to life. They felt more in control. They had a greater appetite for a challenge. On balance, studies support the idea that some people handle stress more effectively because they view themselves as choosing to live challenging lives. I already told you guys that on Sunday, I walked the trail, and it was snowing. It was tough. It took me 2 hours to walk all the way around campus. It took me 2 hours, and I let the dogs off the leash, so they weren't yanking on me for 2.5 miles. I can usually run the trail in about between 30 and 45 minutes if I can run the trail. It took me 2 hours. But I saw it as a challenge. About halfway through, I'm going, damn, I'm tired. This is hard, walking in this damn snow. I must be an idiot. I call myself an idiot a lot. Anyway, but I saw it as a challenge, so I tried to figure out, can I survive? And I was thinking about halfway through, I was thinking to myself, what if I die of a heart attack? You know, I was tired. And then I convinced myself that I would have confronted the challenge and I would have failed, but I would have confronted the challenge. And that's what I kept telling myself, you know. as an idiot, I kept saying, "You idiot, you're facing this challenge." So, hardy people are more likely to engage in positive reappraisal of stressful events, and of course that is what hardy people do. If you survive it, then you should see it as a positive outcome. Resilience is the ability to spring back from sometimes overwhelming stressors and the flexibility to adapt to changing environmental demands. Resilience comes from positive personality traits and positive life experiences. Resilient children have easy temperaments, they have high self-esteem, they have a sense of personal control, they have well-developed academic, social, and creative skills. This is known as social cognition. They tend to have a lot of social support, whether it doesn't have to be from mom and dad, it can be from their brother, from their sister, from Aunt Sally, from their grandparents. It really doesn't matter. They have social support. And somebody has told them that they're worth something. At least one consistent adult in their lives, and this can be, like I said, it can be anybody. Who was I reading about the other day? This kid took care of six kids. Who was that? Oh, geez, what a terrible memory. Oh my goodness gracious. When she was 15 years old, both of her parents died. And there were 6 kids in the family, and she was only 15, and she took care of her family. She raised those 5 kids. As a 15-year-old, she quit school and started working. Who was that? It wasn't Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I can't remember who it was. Anyway, all these stories get mixed up in my mind. Explanatory style can lead to resilience. This is a person's propensity to attribute outcomes to positive causes or negative causes. People who look at the bright side of situations are more likely to survive a stressor. Like me and walking around the trail, that was a stressor. It was hard. My hips are sore from swinging my legs. And as it turns out, if you make a step in the snow, your left foot is over here, your right foot's over here, because I'm this wide. So I can't walk in a single line. Yeah, that's what I was doing. Walk in a single line. That was stupid. Exactly. But of course, after I was done, I was sweaty as a pig, and of course I'm tired, and my hips are sore, and I was thinking, I did it. I was able to do it. My female side came out. Pessimists have attributions that are global, stable, and internal. They have a tendency to ruminate. They are associated with anger. So you need to be as positive as you possibly can be. You need to be as optimistic as you possibly can be. There are pessimists out there, and they think that they're really cool people because they always see the negative in everything. So whereas you try to see the positive and you're wrong like half the time, these people are right almost all the time because they're pessimistic. They tend to ruminate about things. They're associated with anger. They're associated with hostility. They get depressed because they are so negative about things all the time. They tend to smoke. Why would they smoke? What does smoking do for you? It raises your dopamine level. And it relaxes you. Well, it makes you feel good. You get that buzz. It increases your acetylcholine so that you can move more or something. They're more likely to drink alcohol and to abuse drugs. Once again, it has to do with that dopamine loop. They're linked to early mortality. Individuals that are pessimistic tend to die young. And that's kind of ugly and unfortunate. What time is it? 48? Okay. Optimists lead more upbeat lives. They have shorter hospital stays. They have faster recoveries. They have longer and healthier lives. Positive emotions increase a person's physical, cognitive, and social resources. It enables more effective coping with stressful events. It promotes healthier lifestyles. It may also help sustain immune functioning. The more positive you are, the stronger your immune system. Some families are pessimistic. Some families are relatively negative. And that may potentially be because they have less serotonin in their brains. And the reason they have less serotonin is genetic. It's genetic. So these individuals are out there. And you will see whole families of pessimists. My next door neighbors were pessimists. They hated everybody. They hated black people, they hated Hispanics, they hated Republicans, they hated everybody. My dad was a Republican, my mom was a Democrat. They loved my mom, they hated my dad. They were really, really funny people. They were farmers. If you've ever talked to a farmer, it never rains enough or it rains too much. They're not going to get enough they're not getting enough for their crops. They are the most pessimistic people in the world. They are so bad. Nothing's ever perfect, ever. The corn's too tall. What? How can it possibly be too tall? What are you talking about? Anyway, but you'll see whole families of these types of people. My neighbors would yell at each other. I mean, they wouldn't communicate by talking. They communicated by yelling. So, you know, the mom would yell from the kitchen at the dad, and the dad would yell back, and the son would be sitting there, and then he would yell at the son to go do something, and then the son would yell back, well, it's John's turn to do it, you know, that kind of stuff. It was just a pessimistic group of individuals. And they all died young. All of them died young. The mom died young, the father died young, one of the kids died young. One of my neighbors is still alive, which is kind of cool. Anyway, why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time. I'll talk more about being pessimistic and being positive.